to the Mavs Fans for Life podcast. I am Landon Thomas, joined by my co-host Shahnavaz Makhani. Shahnavaz MVP.
MVP. Let's go.
MVP. This is the official Luka Dončić MVP campaign episode. Make sure y'all subscribe. Make sure y'all follow us on social and keep supporting the podcast and just Mavs Fans for Life overall. So Shahnavaz, I mean, I feel like the way he's been playing, first of all, are MVP worthy stats. But after last night, I feel like that was the official start to his campaign. Just because not only did they move up to the 6th in the West, but also they own the tiebreaker over the Suns and in 7-game winning streak, 10 games over 500. First of all, what was your thoughts on the game itself against the Phoenix Suns?
Look, it was scary at first because Phoenix came out hot. I mean, Phoenix was hitting everything in the first quarter.
Did you say uh-oh?
Yeah, it was. I mean, you know, and the Mavericks are notorious for starting off slow. I think we know that. We've seen it plenty of times, not just this season, but we've seen it in prior seasons as well. I think the biggest difference in what you saw last night were a couple of things. Number one, obviously, PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford didn't have, you know, as big of an impact, I think, last night as he has in other games. But PJ Washington started shutting down Kevin Durant. You know, you start slow coming out of the All-Star break, like it makes sense. And keep in mind, there's still, you know, the Mavericks are still trying to integrate 2 key new rotation players, which is not easy to do, right? We saw it last year with Kyrie. I mean, how long it took to get Kyrie kind of fully integrated with the team. And so it's, you know, it's while it looks like a seamless fit on the surface, I mean, it takes time for guys to kind of understand, you know, with a new team and you know, thankfully Luka and Kyrie make it a lot easier on most guys.
Just a little bit.
PJ Washington's defense last night, I mean, the little things, you know, he was doing, you know, the pull-up 3 he had that you know, in transition was beautiful to watch. And then the other thing is Kyrie. Like, you saw Kyrie really take it upon him. What was it? 8 points in like 40 seconds. Like, it was something nuts, right? And all of those buckets for the Mavericks in that stretch all came after like really good defensive possessions. A 15-point swing, you know, in just a few short minutes that really kind of took the game over for Dallas last night. You know, you saw Josh Green getting steals. Luka, you know, we've talked about his improved defense. You know, it's hard when Phoenix comes out as hot as they were, shooting like 63% in the first quarter. And you know, I was sitting there and I'm like, they can't sustain this. Like, it's just not possible. And the Mavericks weren't, it's not like they were shooting bad, 47% in that first quarter. So, you know, they kept pace. They never let the lead get, you know, swell up to be something it wasn't. And they did a great job of attacking the basket and not settling for threes and trying to get those easy looks, especially in transition, where we've talked about, you know, as bad as the Mavericks transition defense has been, they took advantage of that on the other side of it, being, you know, running in transition and getting easy buckets and you know, cutting the lead down. And eventually Luka and Kyrie just took over. And it's been a long time since we've been able to say this, but it really looks like the Mavericks are a scary team again. Like, I don't think anybody in the Western Conference wants to play them, especially when you've got Luka and Kyrie both on their games. And it's really comforting as a fan to know, even if one of them starts off slow, like Luka did last night, Kyrie can, you know, is there to pick that up. Right. And then, you know, Luka can kind of get his legs under him and get, you know, get hot and, you know, then it's for the defense. It's like, who do you guard at that point? Like, what are you supposed to do? You really don't have an option. So, I mean, that game was great. Like, I didn't go in there expecting the Mavs to blow out the Suns, or even really the Mavs to win. I don't know if I had an expectation. You know, we talked about it last week that with Bradley Beal out, you know, it's a key rotation piece for Phoenix that they're missing. But hey, if you're the Mavericks, you got to take advantage of that. And that's exactly what they did last night.
Yeah, it was great to watch. It just, first of all, the you know, like you said, the first quarter, you were sitting back, you're like, okay, it's gonna be one of those games. But that's when you really see the difference between this team and the Mavs of the past. Obviously, you can count in the anomaly of the Western Conference run um, that season, but just overall, just the ability to bend but not break,
Mhm.
and that's what you see with this team. And because the first quarter it was Kyrie, the second quarter was Luka, but just overall it was still a close game. I mean, it was what 63-60
Yeah.
at halftime, but then the third quarter, that's where they really came on for both of them, Luka and Kyrie, and they just came out hot at the beginning, and the Phoenix Suns really couldn't catch up. They're just trying to catch up, but they couldn't. But I just like to see, um, just this team at full strength, because this now you're starting to see a glimpse of what the potential can
Mhm.
be. And it's coming at a perfect time too, where you're at the last third of the season,
Yeah.
and you're seeing how guys are starting to fit in their roles. Because like you said, it's hard when you come in the season for two new guys, especially when you're coming from a, I don't want to say losing organization, but it's just, you have that comfortability with losing.
Yeah.
It's just what it is. What it is. The Wizards and the Hornets haven't won in a long time, and they really had to reset their mentality, and just also just their mental state of where they're at in the season, to pretty much have a 3-game preseason,
Yeah.
because after, and then they had those couple of practices after the break, and um it's really showing how they can click. And I'm really happy for PJ and Gafford. I know you said Gafford didn't play his usual what we've seen in the first 3 games, but the last game, that's what I would like to see, him and
Yeah.
Lively splitting that time, and they each get like 5, 4, and 2 blocks. I mean, that would be great if you win, but obviously you want both of them to dominate. But just from where you at having Luka and Kyrie at the top of the game, it doesn't matter what the other guys do, as long as they represent what they're supposed to do, and that's rebound, and that's be in the right spot, and that's defend.
Hmm. Yeah. And, we've said it so many times, and it's so crazy to watch, like how easy Luka and Kyrie make the game for their teammates. Like
Yeah,
they just have to be in the right position. They have to be in the right spot on the floor, and Luka and Kyrie are going to find them.
yeah.
And the Mavericks, this is a team that earlier in the year would not have been able to overcome another bad shooting night from Tim Hardaway Jr. This is a
Oh
team
yes.
that would not have been able to overcome the non-calls in the first half. Like the officiating last night was a little rough. Like there were a
Hmm.
lot of non-calls that the Mavericks weren't getting, and it's easy to get frustrated. But Luka
Well,
held it
Luka
together.
got frustrated.
He did, yeah. He definitely got frustrated, and rightfully so. There were some calls that weren't going the Mavericks' way, but it's easy. We've seen it before with this team, right? Like they let that get to them, and it affects their play on the court. And I've said it on this podcast with you, Landon, and it all starts with Luka, and I think
Yeah,
having Kyrie there as that kind of veteran leader, guy who's been through the ringers, won a championship. He knows what it takes. Played with a guy like LeBron, for him to kind of impart his wisdom on Luka, and for Luka to take it himself and say, I've got to be a better leader on the court, because everyone follows him, right? If he's got bad body language and he's complaining to the refs and slugging
yeah.
up the court, like it affects everyone else. And you can see more and more with this team just a genuine joy, like everyone loves playing together. Everyone really, really is, knows what they're supposed to do. Since the trade deadline, the Mavs have the 5th best offense in the NBA and the number 1 defense in the NBA by defensive rating. Like we never thought the Mavericks could
Can you
rebound.
say that again?
5th
I just
best
feel like
offense in the NBA and the number 1 defense in the NBA since the trade deadline. And yes,
specifically defense.
defense,
Wow.
right? And yeah, it helps that you play San Antonio and Washington, but let's not forget that the Mavericks were down against the Wizards, and the Mavericks were down against the Spurs, and they came back. They were down against the Suns. Like
Yeah.
this team turns it on when they need to, And when you've got two closers, like Kyrie and Luka, anything is possible.
Yeah. And I also want to say, because initially when we were going to do this podcast, I felt like, oh, we should talk about Jalen Brunson because he talked about his past with the
Yeah.
Mavericks. But, just watching the star power of Kyrie, right? I feel like we gotta move on at some point. I mean, it's been so long. I mean, we've talked about it so much. But Brunson did come out with that interview this week.
Yeah.
But still, it should have been over as soon as the Mavericks acquired Kyrie. Like,
Mhm.
I know health is the biggest flaw with Kyrie, and I'm talking about just strictly, the availability to play the game. But when you watch him on the court, it is like an artist painting a
Insane.
canvas. It's like he really treats basketball, like just watching him, not even just games, just practice or just pregame. Like he truly treats this as his craft, and he even has a T-shirt, "Mastering His Craft." And just watching him, like you said, seamless with Luka, and watch it come into fruition.
Yeah.
It's beautiful to watch. It really is, and I give you credit on what you just said, because you said, having a veteran, and I feel like that's the only way Luka was going to see the full potential of the Dallas Mavericks is, and that's why I brought up Brunson, because I love Brunson. I'm glad he's doing his thing with the Knicks, but to truly see the Mavericks reach their full potential, and not only their full potential but Luka's,
Mm-hmm.
they had to get a veteran star. And that's
Yeah.
where you see the difference between the two. Is we talked about their personalities and how they approach and how they play, their playing styles. They're different, but they have the same mindset as to win, and they
Yeah.
find the ability to coexist together on the court. And it's just magic. I mean, they're the only duo scoring 25 points each a game, 5 assists a game, and 5 rebounds a game. That's
And
the best duo.
they assisted or scored on 100 points last night. Like that's
That's
just ridiculous.
crazy.
That's
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 insane.
unbelievable. And
He
the
has to
whole
stay healthy though.
Yeah,
Both
absolutely.
of them. Both of them.
100%. And injuries are going to happen, and we know both have missed time this year. But I think the Mavericks are in a better spot now to, they can overcome if one of them misses a game or two here and there, right? Like they have enough pieces now and enough depth where, they can kind of overcome some of that. I mean, Jaden Hardy played 1 minute last night. Like we've talked about how great Jaden Hardy has played, and in the event that Luka or Kyrie, are out, the Mavericks are going to need a guy like Hardy to off the bench and maybe even starting, right? Depending on what you want to do with Tim Hardaway. The Mavericks have that luxury now of being able to have depth, and the whole Brunson thing, like, it's unfortunate that it's like every month we keep talking about Jalen Brunson and the Mavs, right?
Every big game he has.
Whether it's an interview he does or whether somebody on ESPN brings it up or whatever. Like the thing that bothers me and the thing that I don't think people realize is, number one, the contract mishandling was at the onset of him being drafted, like not giving him that extra year, to where he could have, been a restricted free agent. I mean, that's mismanagement by Donnie Nelson. We all know that.
Yeah, of
Not
course.
giving him the 4 for 55. In hindsight, yes, it looks bad. And Brunson coming out and saying, I would have taken it, fine. But let's not remember that this is also a player who was benched for Trey Burke against the Clippers the year before, who still was a sixth man until Tim Hardaway Jr. went down that January.
Yeah.
And when Tim Hardaway Jr. went down, Jalen Brunson came in, Luka started missing time, and then Brunson started picking things up. And the Mavericks didn't offer him the deal because he was going to be trade bait. And I have no doubt in my mind that even if the Mavericks had re-signed Jalen Brunson, he would have been traded. He might have been the centerpiece to go to Brooklyn to get Kyrie last year. Like I think that's the thing that people don't realize. Like, even if the Mavericks had re-signed Jalen Brunson, I don't like they had reached their ceiling at that point, that conference finals run.
Yeah.
And I think Brunson would have been on the block and would have been traded for somebody. And so really, I mean, it doesn't make a difference, right? Like he wasn't the missing piece that this team needed. We saw what this team was, but at that point, once you kind of hit that ceiling, you've got to go in, and start looking at, okay, how do we rebuild this team around Luka? And Nico Harrison has done a phenomenal job of that, identifying the right pieces to go along with him. And to your point, just like you said, having that veteran guy, that Luka needed to have, kind of,
Who's won before?
who's won before, won with his idol LeBron, right? Played with, won with a guy who has a very similar, game to Luka. I mean, Luka's compared to LeBron all the time, right? Just in terms of, how they're basketball savants and the way they can, manipulate defenses. Having a guy like that, I think Luka really looks up to him and really, to your point, it really kind of puts things in perspective for him. So the whole Brunson thing, like, yeah, it sucks that we didn't retain him, but the Mavericks wouldn't have Derek Lively if they kept Jalen Brunson. They may not have Kyrie Irving if they didn't have Jalen Brunson. Who knows where this team is at that point? And whoever Jalen Brunson got traded for, even if he didn't, I don't know if that changes the trajectory of where the Mavericks are right now. And like you said, I think we're happy for Brunson, right? Like I think most people are happy. Got his bag. He's playing great. It's always fun to see New York basketball successful because it just it's a great city, and the Knicks are a storied organization, haven't been good in a long time. So good for him. It's awesome to see. But you know what? Right now, I'd rather have Kyrie Irving.
Yeah, and it also boils down to everything happens for a reason,
Absolutely.
right? Like I feel like I honestly feel like the Knicks were meant for Jalen Brunson. I mean, not only the family dynamic, but just like, he needed to have his moment of being a number one guy. And Kyrie's been there, done that. He just wants to win now. He doesn't even care about all-star games. Like, he just wants to win. And you're seeing that. And also, I don't think that Brunson could be the same guy being off the ball with Luka. And that's the key, because Kyrie can. He can be that guy. You just mentioned it with LeBron and KD and all these stars he's played with. He has the option. And I'm not saying he's a sidekick. I'm saying he's a second option, because I think he's a co-star, but he has the ability to perform the same stats, off the ball with Luka. He's just as good off the ball as on the ball. And that's what's so great about Kyrie. It's just health. If he plays down the stretch, the Mavs are going to move up the West easily. But that's all it's been, is health. Is because when you look at the stats with Jalen with the Knicks as the number one option and Kyrie as a second option, they're very similar.
Yeah, they are. And New York was thriving. They wanted a point guard. They got one. And I think you're absolutely right that we would not see this version of Jalen Brunson next to Luka, because we saw it a little bit, but let's not forget that down the stretch, and when the Mavericks were facing the Jazz, the first, what was it, 2 or 3 games Luka missed. That's when Jalen Brunson was, when he was initiating the offense, when he was the primary ball handler. Like that. That's where we saw the Jalen Brunson we see now, right? Like that's where we saw him, really make his money. And Luka comes back, and Luka takes over the Phoenix series, and we all know how that ended. But you're absolutely right. Like this would not be, I don't think Jalen Brunson would be the same player if he was still on the Mavericks, and I don't think the Mavericks would be this good if Jalen Brunson was still on the Mavericks.
And that's the key. That's the key.
And that's what people have to realize. And it's just, for me, I'm so tired of hearing about this, because it's like every month, we're hearing another Jalen Brunson, could have stayed in Dallas, blah, blah, blah. Like, okay, fine. Revisionist history. Like, let's move on. Like you said, like, look at where we are. Look at the success we're having now. Let's be happy, because if had Brunson stayed, who knows what would have happened,
Yeah. And that's what we're going to leave it at. But the interview came out this week, and we were going to touch on it more, but we'll leave it at that. But specifically for this episode, we're talking about Luka's MVP campaign starting right now. Get the buttons, get the t-shirts, the hashtags, everything, because it is time to officially start talking about it. And we've been talking about it all season, but now it's time to actually push for him winning the
Yep.
MVP. And it's incredible to see what he's doing. I mean, he's averaging 34, 9, and 8. That's never been done in NBA history. He leads the Mavs in points, rebounds, assists, steals. He's playing the best defense of his career. And he's averaging career highs. This is Luka, who's coming off of 4 All NBA first team selections. He's averaging a career high in points per game, assists per game, 3-point percentage, free throw percentage, steals, and blocks this season.
It's
And
ridiculous.
that's crazy. And he has a top 10 record with the Mavericks right now through all the injuries, through the 20 plus starting lineups. That's crazy to think about. That's crazy.
I mean, you can put him wherever you want to put him. I think he's a top 3 player in the NBA. He might be number 2. You know, I don't know.
Shahnavaz, where do you put him? Where do you put him right now?
Right now, I put him number 2. I can't put him over Nikola
Number
Jokic.
2. Oh, yeah, that's true.
Jokic.
That's tough.
Yeah, it's, I mean, well, Jokic had what, 15 on 10 of 10 shooting last night. Like, the dude's just a freak. Like, he's
efficiency,
he's ridiculous. Like,
the rebound.
And Jokic is just so much fun. And we saw, the friendship him and Luka have. We saw that at the All-Star game, which is always fun. When those two get together. But I mean,
how many MVPs can he have? No. I mean, he deserves. He's up there.
He definitely is. But I think, we've been talking about Luka for MVP. It feels like every year we're like, he still deserves it, but the Mavericks just haven't been good enough. And now the fact that the Mavericks are in the 6th seed, if they can maintain this, I think Jokic won his first when the Nuggets were the 6th seed. Russell Westbrook won MVP when Oklahoma City was the 6th seed. So I think that's kind of the threshold, right? Is being in that 6th seed or higher to be considered for MVP. I mean, he's got to be number 1 right now. Like, I don't know why people are pushing this Jason Tatum narrative of, Tatum needs to be MVP because he's on the best team. Like, that's never been what MVP is. It's not the best player on the best team.
Yeah.
And Tatum's not having nearly as good of a season as Luka or Jokic or Shea or any of these other guys that should be in the consideration for MVP. So
I feel like that's the tier. That's tier 1 for MVP. Those 3 guys, and then Giannis looking right on the doorstep if they start winning again.
Yeah, and that's what's hurting Giannis, right? Is that the Bucks are 3-7 since Doc Rivers came along. So, and that's a whole other conversation about what's wrong with Milwaukee. But yeah, I mean, I think it's Luka, Jokic, and Shea right now, and I don't know how you can't put Luka ahead of either of them. Like, I understand Denver and Oklahoma City have better records, right? But Denver has been struggling over the last few weeks. We've seen them kind of slip in the standings. I personally think it's going to be between Luka and Shea. I just think, especially with the fact that Oklahoma City is a young team, they're up there in the 2nd seed.
Yeah.
A big win against the Clippers last night. Like, and Shea's averaging, career highs, with points and steals. And he's a great player, but I just don't know how you don't give it to Luka. Like, you watch the games and you just see how seamless it is for him. And the fact that he's going to be, he's in all likelihood going to lead the league in scoring. Like you said, he's having the best season of his career across the board. I think he's the best interior scorer in the NBA by percentage. I think I read something like that on Twitter. His defense, by statistics, he's the best, on ball isolation defender and one of the best post defenders. So, like, his defense, you can tell, has improved, especially the steals. I just don't know how you don't give it to him. Like, the only thing that's holding him back is the Mavericks record. And so if they keep...
That's the problem.
That's the issue, right?
That's the problem.
If they keep on this trajectory, Landon, and they keep moving up, if they just stay in the 6th seed, right? Let's just say season ends tomorrow.
Yeah.
I don't know how you don't give it to Luka. Like, and now the crazy thing is, especially after last night, now, a nationally televised game, people finally starting to see PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford on this team, a fully healthy roster.
Yeah.
Today, all you're hearing now from the big media outlets is, oh, Dallas looks pretty good. Like, you're
Tim Legler has him as MVP.
Like, Luka's the MVP. He's
Even
has the Mavericks.
Wendy.
Yeah, he's got the Mavericks as the fourth. In terms of like who his top five contenders are, he's got the Mavericks fourth ahead of the Suns and other teams. And Windhorse, for as much flack as we give him, he's starting to come around. The only one who's not is Tim Bontemps and Stephen A. Smith. Apparently, they're
Of
just they're
course.
riding the Jason Tatum train. But
And Perk.
and Perk, well, even Perk today was talking about how Luka is the most feared player in the NBA.
Yeah, but we need the MVP
we
narrative.
need the
That's
MVP.
what they never
And
did, the defense narrative or
yeah,
MVP narrative. They
but
just say how good he is.
I think you're starting to see that shift. And as the Mavericks win, and if they keep winning,
Win the national televised
and the
games.
nationally televised games, you're gonna start hearing more and more of Luka moving up that MVP ladder. I don't know if voter fatigue is a real thing, so I don't really know if where Jokic falls in all that. But
Yeah,
I think it's down to those three guys. Like, I don't know how you can give it to anybody else. Like, there's nobody in the East, I think, that's deserving of it. Maybe other than Giannis, but even then, like you said, Milwaukee's not playing well. Tatum definitely is not a top three contender. It's got to be one
he's
of these
good
guys.
though.
He's good. Tatum's
He's
good.
very good.
Don't get me wrong. I like Jason Tatum. I think he's a great player, but I don't think he's an MVP. Like,
No.
just because you're the best player on the best team, when you've got guys like Jaylen Brown and Kristaps Porzingis and Derek White, and you play in a
Drew Holiday,
and you play in a crappy Eastern Conference, that doesn't mean that you should be the MVP. Like,
and look at stats across the board, all
significantly better.
Even defense, like all of the stats are better than Tatum.
Yeah,
easily.
And the Mavs are the best clutch team in the NBA. Like I mentioned earlier, they're the best defensive team since the trade deadline. If they can just keep this up, I think more and more you're going to start hearing people outside of Dallas, very much like we could say, start to get on that bandwagon of, okay, look at where the Mavericks were and look at where they are now, and that's because of Luka, making everyone better and putting them in a position where they're not going to be in the play-in. If the Mavericks move up to the 5 seed, Landon, if we're looking at a month out and the Mavericks are in the 5 seed, I think it's a guarantee he's going to win MVP.
So is that your threshold where it becomes a guarantee? Well, not guarantee, but like it's starting to run away for Luka.
I think like
fifth seed.
If they get the 5th seed, I think it's a runaway. I don't. Okay. At that point, how can a team that was dead in the water, that was middling around 500, that was in the 11th seed, 10th seed, a month ago, and even through injuries, Luka's carrying this team, putting up ridiculous numbers in December and January.
Yeah.
And then they jump all the way up to the 5 seed. Like, you cannot tell me that he doesn't like that. He's a lock at that point.
Well, that's where it comes to my mind, where I am frustrated. I am so frustrated with, because I'm frustrated with the weight that the team record has on individual awards. And the reason I say that is because I agree with you. I feel like 5th seed is where you say, okay, now it's Luka's. It's Luka's award, unless the Mavericks go on a losing streak. It's his award if they get 5th seed or up. 6th seed, you're like, okay, he's going to get some votes, but now we can seriously talk about Luka winning MVP. But here's where I struggle with it, because 2 things. One is because 5th seed and 6th seed, they could literally be half a game. Well, not half a game or a full game apart throughout the remaining 27 seed.
It's a game right now between Dallas and New Orleans.
Exactly. So 5th seed and 6th seed, on a normal season, you're thinking, oh, a couple games, 3 games, 4 games, but it could go down to the wire to the last game of the season. And that's why I always feel like it's so heavily weighted on how you do as a team. But then my second point is injuries. He's never had a consistent team. He was holding this team above water while every single game, there was a stretch where every single game we saw 3 or 4 rotation players out for the Mavericks, including starters.
Yeah.
And I don't think people at the national media level understand that, because Shea has had a healthy team. if the Mavericks had a healthy team, they would be up there with the Thunder and Timberwolves and the Clippers and Nuggets. But they didn't. And then you look at the Nuggets. I mean, Jamal Murray is playing, right?
Yep, they've been
Michael
healthy the
Porter
last time.
Jr. I mean, those players are playing. And Luka had Lively out for a lot of games. Kyrie missed like 20 games.
Yeah.
And Josh Green 13. Or the list goes on and on. Exum hasn't even played. I mean, since like a month. But that's what I'm trying to say. Like starters and heavily rotation guys on the Mavericks have been injured, and I don't think that is taken into account for MVP. And that's why Luka is so valuable to this team, because if he was out, on top of all the
Mhm.
injuries,
Oh boy, B.
um, I
Would have been
mean,
rough.
it would have been rough. You would be looking at the Blazers or Spurs where they would be if he missed as much as games as Kyrie. But you know, he's held his team together where they had a fighting chance, and then when they're all starting to come together, now you're seeing it come, in the mold where they're moving up the West.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate. You make a great point because
20 plus starting lineups.
it's ridiculous. And the Nuggets have been healthy, the Thunder have been healthy, the Timberwolves have been healthy. I mean, I completely agree with you. I also think there's some bias towards, there's just national hatred towards Dallas, and we've talked about this. I just think, there's always some reason why, Luka's not going to be in the conversation for some folks. Whatever it is, whatever the case may be, because he's European, because the way he plays the game, because people don't like the way he complains, or whatever the case may be. But if you watch the games and you see what he's done, especially with players out, like you mentioned, this
Yeah,
team would be really bad.
yeah,
When you're missing 4 rotation players, and Luka's playing 40 minutes a night and still putting up ridiculous numbers, and the Mavericks are still winning. Let's not forget, like Luka, put this team on his back during that stretch in December and January, when Kyrie was out, when Derek Lively was out, and kept the Mavs afloat so that they could get to this point where everyone's healthy. Now you see the impact that he has, and
in the addition of the 2 new players
yeah,
too.
the addition of the 2 new guys, and what this team is capable of down the stretch, and
Hmm.
and you reward that by giving Luka the MVP. And I think if they can get in the 5th seed, I think it's a done deal.
Yeah,
I mean, look, like they're a game out of the 5. They're 4 games out of the 4th seed. I mean, there might be a chance. I mean, the Mavs have the 3rd easiest schedule down the stretch. Like this is an opportunity where the Mavericks could potentially get into having home court. I won't go so far as saying that they're gonna get the 4th seed, but if they're teetering around, that 6 and 5 and 6 seed, I just think if they
yeah,
can stay in this position and Luka keeps playing the way he's playing, I think he'll win the award. I don't think him being the Mavericks being the 6 seed is gonna affect that, because like you said, it's gonna be a game. It's gonna be half a game. It's not gonna be like a major gap in where they are, relative to where they finished the season. So if you just look at it on statistics and you look at the season he's having and you look at the success the Mavericks are having now that everyone's healthy, there's no doubt in my mind that he's the MVP, and it's good that he's finally getting traction, with
yeah,
national voters and national media. That's the other thing, right? It's like,
yeah,
they'll push this agenda, and voters are those are some of the MVP voters, right? These guys on national media. So,
yeah.
if they're pushing a certain agenda, if they're going to start pushing Luka now, like that's going to start influencing, and people are going to start paying more attention to what's going on, with the Mavericks.
Yeah, you're totally right. And I feel like what has to happen is obviously keep winning.
Mm-hmm.
And you just talked about the schedule. So make sure you win every winnable game, and
Yep.
then you split the games that you have a chance in. And then Luca has to, it seems like if he just has we're already February 23rd. If he just, I mean, it seems like he already has the player of the month locked up. I
Yeah.
mean,
Good.
because the Nuggets record is not as good as the Mavericks, so it looks like Luka's going to get February. And if he plays like this next month and they win those, you know, that favorable schedule,
Yep.
he could win that player of the month. And that's how you build a case. And that's how you get recognition. So it's a little bit of both. National media who are voters, has to give it a fair analysis on everything involved. And
That's the key word, is fair analysis.
fair
That's
analysis, everything involved. And also Luka has to do his part. He
yeah.
has to keep performing at a high level, and the Mavericks have to keep playing great defense. And that's what I'm excited to see. What you mentioned is, even though if Kyrie misses some games, their defense, PJ and Gafford, along with Lively being back and Maxi Kleba being back, their defense, Josh Green's playing well. Derek Jones Jr. is playing
Yeah.
great, especially in the decrease of minutes that he's getting now. He's still team first, and because it's a contract year, he was
Mhm.
he was balling out, but he's he's still in that win mindset. That goes a long way. So I feel like the defense is good enough to sustain Kyrie missing some games, because like you said, Jaden Hardy can plug in, and that's an interesting thing because kids showed us his rotation.
Yeah.
The 9-man rotation. Hardaway played so many minutes and he had a bad game. I was surprised kid didn't go to Hardy, and that's why I asked him post game about, what do you say to Hardy when you just mentioned it. He was efficient. He was playing great.
Yeah.
He was even committed to defense. Like, he was showing growth in his game. We talked about it
Yep.
on the pod. And, kid said, you just have to be a pro. Your time's going to come. You're going to get another chance. But it's time to win. And
Yeah.
that hit me because I'm like, dang, even though this team is pushing to win, he still played Hardaway 30 minutes and he was having a bad game. You couldn't give Hardy 10, but he said they're deep. The
Yeah.
team is deep. So just be ready when your name is called. And what do you think about that? I mean, Hardy
Yeah.
is balling.
That's
And Exum is coming back.
coming
Where does
back.
he
Yeah.
fall in the mold?
And we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. What kind of happens? What's going to happen with Hardy? When Exum comes back, because luckily Exum can play kind of that guard and forward spot. And
Yeah.
Hardy definitely is going to be more of your back. Your one or two off the
Mm-hmm.
bench. I actually was fine with not playing Jaden Hardy last night. I think when it comes down to matchups like that, where the tiebreaker's on the line and you're playing another playoff opponent, you're trying to move up in the standings, a team that, if you jump them, it was a pretty significant game. There were a lot of reasons why outside of the Luka and Booker hate fest. It's, the fact that seeding's on the
I'm
line.
so mad they're friends now.
I know, it's unfortunate.
It's that rivalry was building.
It was, yeah. It's just Luka just seems like he likes to play with everybody. It seems like a nice guy. I think when he hangs out with Jokic too much, that gets him super friendly. That's what happened.
Yeah.
But there was a lot on the line last night. So I think Jason
Mhm.
Kidd did the smart thing in my mind, sticking with. I don't want to say veterans, because Lively obviously is a rookie, but Lively plays older than he is. And I think he wanted to stick with the veterans, especially in a game like that, where even if Tim Hardaway Jr. is missing shots, you've got guys like Kyrie and PJ and Maxi, who can kind of clean that up. And so, not that Jaden Hardy's bad and would have started hoisting up shots. I just think defensively, Tim Hardaway Jr. is a little bit more seasoned, especially the way Phoenix was playing. Like, they kept it close, like you said, up until kind of midway through that third quarter. So, and you don't want to let the lead slip away either in the fourth.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
I'm totally fine with not playing Hardy. It'll be interesting to see upcoming games against teams like the Pacers, the Raptors, teams that have been struggling and kind of at the bottom end of the Eastern Conference, what kids' rotations look like. Because I would love to see Luka and Kyrie only playing like 31, 32 minutes in some of those games, and Jaden Hardy getting 20, 25 and letting kind of letting them get some rest, until you have big games and big opponents like Boston next week and things like that. So I just think because of the circumstances, that's why he didn't play Hardy. But
Yeah.
it'll be
It
like you
felt
said.
like a play-in game.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting down the stretch, especially when Exum comes back, what that looks like, because one of those guys is going to get shafted out of a rotation spot,
Yeah,
and it'll be interesting to see who it is.
I just feel like there was 30 minutes of Hardaway, and he was
Yeah,
one from 9 from beyond
yeah,
the arc. And I feel like those minutes, and like you said, I mean, you could cut Hardaway's minutes down to 20 and give 10 to Exum. You could cut him down to 15, give 5 to Hardy, give 10 to Exum, and give 15 to THJ. But if you even if you don't play Exum, don't play Hardy, just stick with your 9-man rotation to get ready for playoffs. I feel like that's okay in the regular season, but you don't want to sit Hardy and Exum when he comes back, hopefully on this road trip. You know, you don't want to sit them in the regular season and then you go in the playoffs and Hardaway is cold
yeah,
because he's the streakiest. He's probably what behind Clarkson. I mean, he's probably in Levert.
yeah.
Hardaway is probably the streakiest guy in the whole entire NBA.
And I think
And,
that's why Kid probably left him in, right? It's like the second
mm,
he gets hot, he normally goes off. And the
yeah,
other thing to think about as well is just the matchup itself. I think Phoenix, their guards are a little bit bigger. They are a little
yep,
bit bulkier. Guys like Eric Gordon and Grayson Allen. So I think Hardy would have had a tough time, and we've seen Hardy have success against smaller guys like DeLon Wright, in that Washington game, and Tyus Jones, and so. I think that's why you probably,
matchup.
matchup wise, you'll probably see in a game like against Phoenix, that's probably a Dante Exum game right off the bench instead of
Yep.
Jaden Hardy, and I think games against,
But that's what I'm saying. He didn't even play. So where does Exum fit in this
yeah,
rotation?
that's going to be, look, it's a good problem to have, right? I mean, I'm
Yep.
happy having the depth and being able to say, well, we're going to get a guy back from injury. Where is he even going to play? As opposed to, oh my God, do we have to rush Dante Exum back from a foot injury and play him 35 minutes because we have nobody else on the team? You know, like I'm
Yeah.
it's a great problem to have, and it's amazing that at this point in the season we're having this conversation as opposed to where we thought the Mavs would be, back in December. And so
Yeah.
it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, I don't I'm hoping Kid, and I don't think the Mavericks will. I don't think they will rush Exum back. I think they're in a good
Yeah.
spot now where they can let him rehab and let him go through his workouts and get right. They don't have to bring him back and risk injury, or even if he starts slow, you've got enough depth where you can pull him and put somebody else in. And so he doesn't have to be part of that starting five anymore.
Well, this is what I said about Jaden and Josh. I said this was their make or break season.
Yep.
And I feel like Josh has obviously succeeded our expectations. He not succeeded because he is still inconsistent a little bit, but he's at least met
Yeah. Oh yeah.
so,
Definitely.
some of our expectations, and he's thriving in being that glue guy in the starting lineup. But with Hardy, I feel like he's still incomplete, and I can't wait to get into our next progress report or report card to talk about each player and a new one with PJ Washington
Yeah.
and Gafford. But I feel like you have to eventually develop, and that's what I do like about Pop with the Spurs. Well,
Mhm.
you still see it some, but it's just because they're rebuilding. But like when they were good, they would develop their young players to take over for their high paid bench guys.
Yeah.
They still had their core, and that's why I want to see Hardy play significant minutes in these type of games, even
Right.
though like you said, the pressure is high, and the implications of the game is playoffs. So you have to play the guys who have the experience, but to have experience, you have to get experience. And I feel like
True.
Jaden Hardy, you have to groom him to take THJ's spot, because he's making a lot of money and Hardaway's not.
Yeah.
And that's how you stay sustainable to have success of your top guys, your core, and then your bench, you can have replaceable guys. And that's how you have to groom this team. Even though everyone loves Maxey, you really have to groom Derrick Jones Jr. if you want to sign him to a cheap deal,
Mhm.
or groom Omax.
Yeah.
You have to groom these guys to take Maxey's spot in a couple years. You can't keep paying these guys extensions, and get older. You got to
Yeah.
replace them with the younger
True.
guys and develop them.
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting to see, especially with the stretch of games coming up, the rest of February and kind of into March. Like we talked about, the Mavs have a pretty easy schedule just by, opponent records.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see in some of these games where they're playing lesser opponents, teams that are kind of out of the playoff race, like a Toronto,
Yeah.
like a Chicago, Detroit, all those coming up, here in the next couple of weeks. Like, that'll be interesting to see, how much time Hardy's getting, and I think we'll start to kind of get a better sense. I don't think he's going to play a lot against Denver. I don't think he's going to play a lot against OKC, against Boston,
or even the Cavs.
Even the Cavs. Cavs are surprisingly very, very good this year. It's going to be interesting. I agree with you that you've got to groom him and you've got to put him in a position where, is THJ a movable contract now in the off season, right? If he's got, he'll be on an expiring deal. Is that a guy you can, maybe trade if Hardy can consistently fill that role? That gives you another option of being able to make another move, for somebody else. So it'll be interesting to see. I hope, and I want to see in some of these other games, where the Mavericks potentially have a pretty decent lead, how much Hardy plays.
Yeah, because I feel bad for whoever is in charge of the financials or the budget for the Mavericks payroll, because just they're giving tips to Nico on how to reconstruct this thing and fit under the bill. But even with the new owners, with how much money they're bringing in, over luxury tax purposes. But I'm just talking about, you're eventually going to have to pay Lively, in a few years, and Josh Green's extension kicks in next season.
Yep.
So when you think about that, you have to eventually, like next season, Hardy has to play every single game.
Yeah.
If he's on this roster, he has to play every single game. And then you see Omax in the Hardy role where he plays half the games. And when they're playing the lower tier teams in the league, he has to play, 15 minutes, where you start grooming him, because that salary is going to be tough if you're constantly having bench guys. Like, the only guy on the bench who should be making a lot of money is Gafford.
Yeah.
And because he's the best backup center in the league, he could start for half the teams. So everyone else should be making as much as Gafford or lower, but not more. Yeah.
I agree, and I know there's a love-hate relationship with Tim Hardaway Jr. It's
unless he comes back on a cheap deal.
Yeah, which
he's going to be looking for his final payday.
Yeah, and and we've talked about this, right? I mean, he's it seems like the most streakiest guy in the NBA, and we said it earlier when he was hot in November, December. Like, just wait, it's gonna come. Like, there's gonna be a stretch where he's gonna go 0 of 8, 1 of 9, in back-to-back games, and how does he rebound from that, right? Like, how does he, as an individual player, it's good that he's not thrust into this role where he's got to hit all these shots. It's good having Kyrie back, where even if he's missing, like, you're still seeing Dallas win games. I just want him to be a better shot taker, man. Like, some of the threes he hoists up, I'm just like, what are you doing, dude? Like, pass the ball, get your open looks. Like, you don't have, like, I understand you want to catch, you're trying to catch fire and trying to get back in your rhythm, but shooting it over 2 Phoenix defenders is not going to work. Just get open. Luka and Kyrie are going to find you.
And half the time, those shots will win you games, but the other half of the time, it will take you out of games.
That's what leads to transition buckets, and that's the Mavericks' weakness, right? We've talked about it a lot. The Mavericks are, or at least prior to the trade deadline were not good in transition, in
Yeah.
transition defense. It's good that they have quicker guys now, but you can't be taking those shots.
And that's why I want to see Hardy continue the efficiency and the defense that we were seeing
Yeah,
the few or the handful of games before the All-Star break. He was really getting after it on defense, and that's why I want to see him keep continuing to grow, because there's a lot of people are on this team that are going to make money, and you need those smaller deals on the bench, because not only the players I mentioned, even the players that are on longer term deals.
Mhm.
PJ Washington, he's on he's on an affordable deal at 16 mil. In a couple of years, when it's up, you're gonna have to pay him more than 16
Yeah,
mil if he
definitely.
continues this defense.
And Luka's potential extension in a couple of years, right? Like,
Yeah,
how much
and
is he going to get a
Kyrie.
year? Is
Well, I
how
mean,
much how much are they going to get
Luca
a year? Like
Luca's probably gonna by that time 70,
70,
65.
75, something like that. Yeah,
Man, that's why I said whoever is the financial person for the Mavs, they need to be the highest paid in the front
highest paid
office.
staff for any organization.
Even though more than Nico, because that's a
Yeah,
tough
that's
job,
the part.
man.
That's a tough place to be in.
I can't even imagine. Okay, Shahnavaz. So this was all about Luca. I mean, we touch on how the Mavericks are doing, but um, the campaign officially starts for Luca
Yep.
to be taken serious for MVP. And obviously his game shows MVP, but like we said, the record is the truth teller on who wins MVP. And now, it's wide open. Uh Speaking on standings. So
Yeah.
you have to win your games, because like you and I mentioned, that tier one is Jokic, Doncic, and SGA. You know, Giannis, if they start winning again, he can have a say. But those really three, maybe four, are the only guys who have a legitimate chance to win MVP from what I've seen. I'm sure what you've seen, since you just mentioned the same thing.
Absolutely.
Um, so Shahnavaz, obviously big win, 7-game win streak, 10 games over 500. Feels like for the first time in forever. Um, what would you like to see in this Pacers game? That's the next game coming up. Final words. What is your thoughts on that game? First time seeing Siakam,
Hmm.
and Halliburton still performing so well. What's your thoughts on how this team heads into that game after this winning streak?
Yeah, I'm going to be interested to see the defense, because you're going up against a guy in Tyrese
Yeah,
Halliburton who's leading the league in assists. He's got like 12 assists in like 8 straight games or something like
yeah,
that. Like,
and that three
dude,
ball.
and he's a great shooter. I mean, great player. I think he's well liked around around the league. And Pacers are a sneaky good team. When you got guys like Siakam and Miles Turner and Benedict Mathurin off the bench, and of course Carlisle, a coach, like,
And Neesmith, I love
Neesmith.
Aaron Neesmith. Yeah.
So I think it's a game the Mavs can't take lightly. I want to see that same aggressiveness on the defensive end. Just stay consistent, get in the passing lanes. How many steals can you get? You gotta shut down Halliburton. Finding the open guy, because that's where the Pacers thrive. So yeah, Dallas just needs to keep up what they're doing. I mean, there's not really much to complain about when you're on a 7-game winning streak at this point. Kind of hard to nitpick. We're
And that's
talking
what
about how many minutes bench players are going to get, and it's just like, all right, this is awesome.
yeah. And that's what's so hard, because like, you and I we always fall in the middle of the line,
Yeah,
not overly a positive, but not overly negative. We just keep it real. But I mean, there's a lot of positive the
yeah.
past couple of weeks.
Like, there's not really much to say.
Yeah, I always try to find a way. And the only thing is Tim Hardaway Jr., but most of the time he's doing good.
Yeah, it's like, all right, if that's your one weakness, like, that's fine. Like, I'm okay with that.
And he's a sixth man, so that's kind of
Yeah.
what they are. But this is a true test, because After trade deadline, they're like 5-0, and then with Washington and Gafford, they're 4-0. And then overall, the win streak 7-0. But this is a true test because they're going on the road.
Yeah.
And that's the real test to see how they do on the road against the Pacers, who are 6th seed in the East right now, and they're 18-11 at home. So I really want to see them come out strong instead of the third quarter, the first quarter.
Yep.
Yes, and I don't want to see Halliburton recreate the All-Star game where he has all these threes to begin the game. I want to see the defense really lock up. Josh Green, that's a good matchup.
That'll be fun.
Ooh, Washington on Siakam.
Yep.
And Josh Green on Halliburton. That's what I like. Now they have two guys who can play big and small on the best guys on the opposing team. So I want to see Washington keep up the defense and hold Siakam because he's tough in transition.
Mm-hmm.
And you just mentioned the Mavs in transition defense. And then Josh Green continue playing good defense and passing the ball, which he's been doing great at, and just being a good glue guy, shooting corner three, the intangibles. Keep that up. So those are the things I would like to see. So once again, get your buttons, get your t-shirts, hashtags, push
Luka for MVP.
Luka for MVP, because the national media are slowly coming around, but we have to call it like it is. We have to push it. If they don't do it, someone has to. So make sure y'all like and subscribe and follow us on social as well. You see the social handles. So follow us on Twitter, X, whatever you call it. Thanks for tuning in.